Dear friends, this is such a pleasure. It's such a beautiful institution, the Olympiad. Right from the start of Plato's text, the Charmides, one is in for a major surprise. The greatest of philosophical writers, instead of focusing on philosophical themes and majestic abstractions, takes us to an immediate situation of a first-person narrator who is speaking colloquially as if to a friend, chatting on life's contingencies, incidental details, and contextual eventualities of the situation at hand. Let's take a look at the... this is the opening. I'm just indicating that this really is an episode in somebody's life. If this is an introduction to some major abstract themes, it clearly is unclear what the themes are. There is no justification why these details should merit the reader's attention at such considerable length. A minimal observation is that one does not find such personally painted, context-intensive, story-like openings in current academic philosophical journal articles. Yet, it is by paying specific, emphasized focus to the context that Plato opens Charmides, as indeed is also the case, for instance, in Plato's Kriton, Laches, or Ephiro. Is it perhaps conceivable that making the thinking of better thinking feel relevant to the reader is a conscious and important decision on the part of Plato? Is it possible that style and tone is an integral part of the content for philosophy that wants to make philosophizing something people carry out themselves and with a view to their actions and events within the non-philosophical situations of their life? Is it possible that such maneuvers and stylistic devices as the use of first-person discourse, episodic storytelling, and contextualization, as well as non-adversarial, friendly tone, is beneficial from the point of view of the broader aims of philosophy and from the perspective of conducting philosophy as a transformative force? The broader aims of philosophy, while clearly a leading motive for Plato in texts such as Charmides, have become marginalized with the rise of philosophy as an academic discipline. Yet, even within the confines of the hyper-specialized scholarly matrix of academic philosophy, occasional glimpses of the ancient promise of philosophy as a transformative force can be noticed to push through. One particularly prominent instance is Maurice Merleau-Ponty, one of the recognized greats of the 20th century philosophy in 1952, facing the honored professors and scholarly audience of his inaugural address as the newly appointed professor of philosophy at Collège de France. In Merleau-Ponty's lecture entitled "In Praise of Philosophy," we find three statements that were highly provocative in 1952 and remain so today. Provocative statement number one: the philosophy placed in books has ceased to challenge men. Merleau-Ponty here describes a prevailing state of affairs and implies an ideal that the practice dominant in his time falls short of. He implies that, in his view, philosophy should challenge people, as opposed to just address the select few of the philosophical discipline. Provocative statement number 2. What he, the modern philosopher, says enters first of all into an academic world where the choices of life are deadened and the occasions for thought are cut off. Merleau-Ponty here makes a connection between free thinking of the kind he believes philosophy should cultivate and life itself. Most empathetically, Merleau-Ponty is not diminishing life to only intellectual and scholarly life. But as Merleau-Ponty provocatively sees it, the academic world as a setting for the activities of the philosopher, a great platform for intellectual feats to be sure, instead of elevating the philosopher's contributions and chances for thinking, limps them, languishes them, even, as Merleau-Ponty puts it, deadens them. As if this already would not be sufficiently radical in the scholarly context of his speech, Merleau-Ponty goes on to express his distrust of the written word from the point of view of philosophers' possibilities. To make his point, Merleau-Ponty introduces to us something he calls the total function of the philosopher. The contrast is to a functionary, as he puts it, somebody just serving a kind of administrative function within a particular instrumentality, brought along with a narrowed down focus on the written word. Quote, "The modern philosopher is frequently a functionary, always a writer." In contrast to such a philosopher as a functionary, Merleau-Ponty brings up Socrates. Quote, "In order to understand the total function of the philosopher, we must remember Socrates." Merleau-Ponty's provocative claim number 3, as I would put it, is that the total function of the philosopher is not remembered. When operating from the total function of the philosopher challenges people and aims to contribute to the actual conduct of people's life. We are here sliding from what philosophy is to what philosophy should be. In his book, What is Ancient Philosophy, and other writings, Pierre Hadot approaches philosophy as it was. Like Merleau-Ponty, Hadot sees Socrates as the beacon of philosophy that serves the aim to challenge people to actually live a better life, as opposed to just present abstractions about a better life in the form of theories, intellectual distinctions, and rationalistic maneuvering. As the general title for this Olympiad in philosophy is Democracy and Authoritarianism, at the time of the rise of arrogant, non-democratic forces, not just in countries rich in authoritarian past, but in established democracies in Europe and even in the United States of America, one can note that the kind of philosophy Socrates, Merleau-Ponty, or Hadot stood for is utterly needed, but in actual practice remains limp. Wisdom and reflective moderation, justice and fairness, trustworthiness, the elevation of others, are possible modes of conduct, human excellencies, for people not only to reflect upon, but also to hold dear in heart. Temperance, fair judgment, and wise consideration, respect for dialogue and truth, are not only possible abstract themes experts with scholarly ambitions can argue about with other fellow experts, but something ordinary people, irrespective of background or education, professional guild, level of income, or other demographic features, can personally take seriously and consider to be fundamental to the human condition. As parents, people habitually address the question of the direction of change and growth their children take in life from the point of view of respecting the cultivation of such human aspirations as moderation, temperance, generosity, respect for friendship, dialogue and truth. This is indeed how I read Plato in Charmides. Plato is not primarily focusing on theorizing. I am not saying this as a striking particular interpretation of the text, but as something we should claim back from the academic demagogy and discourse, a naive reading of a text to the benefit of our lives. Some naivety is indeed called for if we are to re-enter the transformative force of philosophy, as I believe that nobility lived in the efforts of Socrates. Certain naivety is required if we want to approach our own lives as lived in the actual circumstances of our lives, embodied and corporal, as we emerge in the fleeting flow of now moments through our actual lives, as opposed to abstractions or representations of generic lives. Living a life in its paradoxes and contradictory tensions might be exciting as a theoretical theme, but the struggle people live through each moment is more than that. That something can be approached in the mode Socrates called for, betterment through better thinking, and the betterment of the thinking of such thinking. The transformative power of philosophy, as something that concerns our own lives in contrast to theories of them, calls for certain naivety, because the subject matter that is implicated is not well defined or categorized as a prefixed something. There is no objectively indicated primary foundation that could be identified unequivocally and intellectually. Yet each moment your life continues. It could emerge in the next moment as something better for your loved one because of something you thought and did better. I am not making an intellectual claim here. Instead, I am trying to remind of what comes natural to a mother and her baby. Even if it's the case that the examination of one's life through argumentative and analytic theoretical rationalizations could lead to betterment in the sense indicated by Socrates, the exclusively conceptual route to the desired outcome is only one option. The mother and the infant, in the process in which they bring about human growth and serve the life's miracle, do operate through an endowment that is more than just concepts. Similarly, in your personal case, the actual living of a Socratically better tomorrow can find support and justification from the realm of concepts, but not reduced to any intellectual construct, stance, ground or standing, any more than living the life of a baby with her mother, whatever their thinking might involve, can be. In fact, I think it is decidedly naive to assume that the conceptual creativity and ingenuity of philosophy during the past 2,500 years, and especially since Kant, would wipe out the fact that living a life is more than just concepts, creation, analysis, or management. I love concepts myself. I love language. But I also love music. And I love what can happen in interaction. Whatever happens between a baby and her mother, as an instance of the abundantly rich process of life and the phenomenon of growth, amounts to something more than a conceptual entity of some description falling into a category, and involves a movement forward that I believe the Socratic calling in philosophy challenges us to address. We should use whatever resources we have, conceptual or non-conceptual, in our thinking, and the thinking of our thinking, to serve the case of the better life. In a renewed attempt to answer the question, is the human race continually improving? That's the title. Immanuel Kant observes that, quote, the problem of progress cannot be solved directly from experience. Then points out, commonsensically, that, quote, a prophetic history of the human race must nevertheless start from some sort of experience. The quotation continues. We must therefore search for an event which would indicate that such a cause exists and that it is causally active within the human race. And it would have to be a cause which would allow us conclude, as an inevitable consequence of its operation, that mankind is improving. Quote, it might then serve to prove the existence of a tendency within the human race as a whole. End of quotation. These statements are understandable to a layman, as is the next punchline by Kant that highlights, quote, an occurrence in our times which proves this moral tendency of the human race. The event in question is, quote, proves that mankind as a whole shares a certain character in common, and it also proves that man has moral character, or at least the makings of one. Writing at the time of the French Revolution, which may succeed or may fail, as he put it, Kant states that the historic event nevertheless, quote, cannot have been caused by anything other than a moral disposition within the human race. Then Kant goes on to make his key claim particularly important to us, quote, for a phenomenon of this kind, which has taken place in human history, can never be forgotten, since it has revealed in human nature an aptitude and power for improvement. Just as Plato led us to acknowledge the possibility of Socratic thinking for an improved human life as a contextual phenomenon that points to betterment as from a given situation of actual living. Through a change in thinking, Kant's point, in my view, is to force to the forefront of philosophy the need to consider fundamental moral themes of the utmost philosophical significance vis-à-vis the empirical reality, history, and one's own time, beyond the purely conceptual. The actual reality we live and co-create with others, this suggests, does have relevance for philosophical theorizing, philosophical modes of action, and for the philosophical way of life. It presents a possible perspective for us to evaluate philosophizing and the thinking of our thinking. Is the Socratic call dismissed in the busy activities of the philosophical academia? Not long ago, in a rally by the candidate that had lost the election for presidency, the lost candidate encouraged his supporters to rush to the Capitol Hill in Washington with the assignment to prevent the relevant institutional bodies from carrying out their constitutional duties of formalizing the victory of the candidate that had won the election. People around the world watched in real-time television how an outraged crowd did indeed violently enter the building at which the proceedings were taking place. The most powerful military and security force in the world did not stop the mob. The President of the United States did not stop the mob. At stake was one of the most sacred acts of democracy, the peaceful transition of power. One conclusion of this historical event is that to the extent philosophy is supposed to bring its contribution and carry the torch of wisdom to reflective moderation and justice as they are lived in actual reality, American philosophy, in all its intellectual, academic, and scholarly grandeur, has not been very efficient. The potential proved weak in the context of contributing to what in history will loom large as an outrage and travesty to democracy. Even if we grant that people might not be that autonomous in their decisions, surely it is safe to think that some amount of thinking is up to the people themselves to stand accountable for when it comes to their own actions. Whether in the French Revolution, Auschwitz, Capitol Hill, or in some more mundane context, it is possible for humans to acknowledge that the majestic, grand, noble calling of philosophy, as set out by Socratic example, as articulated to us by Plato, as alluded to by Merleau-Ponty as the total function of the philosophy, as argued for by Hadot having been prominent in ancient Greece, is indeed relevant and will continue to be relevant from the point of view of life as lived. We should take it seriously as professional philosophers. Like any human endeavor, deliberation on truthfulness, on love, on wisdom can succeed or fail. Philosophical reflection and the thinking of one's thinking as an aspiration to challenge, to live one's life better, remains, however, a possibility that can lead to a more responsible way of life. The fact that we might fail in our Socratian midwifery is no reason to give up the effort before it even started. Did Aristotle not fail with Alexander the Great as a teacher of moderation, fairness, and wisdom? Maybe so, but the map is not the territory. Maybe Aristotle failed to appreciate the point of the beginning of Charmides as a reminder of the necessity to attune and connect with people emotionally before you try to educate them. Maps can be mesmerizing because they offer relative certainty. Scholarship can. To the extent the Guild of Professional Experts, the particular school of philosophy that you decide to serve, is in fact devoted to particular kind of map making, you might find that your calling is to devote yourself to the further development of those particular kinds of maps. In the choice between the red bill and the blue bill in the film The Matrix, the blue bill has its strong points. The blue bill in conductive philosophy offers the prospects of considerable attraction in the form of an illusion of certainty, with a linear and rational, intellectually challenging progress within the boundaries of a socially agreed discourse and evaluation systemics, along with the feeling of objectivity in the hierarchy of contributions that emerge. Most of all, it offers a promising release from the anguish that existential philosophers and writers have emphasized as part of the human condition. This is the road most of academic philosophy has chosen. You avoid the anguish of the human condition by placing your agenda on the intellectually glorious conceptual map of your choosing. The road less traveled, in contrast, is one that holds on to the primary focus of challenging the living of one's life forward, and against the fact that anything you do in actual life might emerge as something different from what you aimed it to be. It is a life that braces for impact with life's uncertainty. Because life is lived with others and within the radically unknown, anything can turn out to yield the opposite to what one intended it to be. This is agony vis-à-vis the basic situation of the dynamic and emerging setting of the complex interconnectivity of life that is our condition. Philosophy, as a cultural undertaking, enjoys abstraction. Yet abstraction as a human undertaking is not all there is for better thinking to draw from. If philosophy as a transformative force wants to stand for its ancient promise, one prerequisite is to allow potential transformation to attune with the human, all too human, set of sensibilities, the something or other that Nietzsche and William James, for instance, have highlighted with tremendous literary force. Beyond what is captured by abstractions and concepts, while maintaining respect to whatever philosophy as a conceptual enterprise can contribute. Almost 40 years ago, right here in the Portania building at the University of Helsinki, in the midst of an introductory course on the history of philosophy, something happened that has proved personally transformative to me. I was 31 years of age, lecturing on Aristotle with a certain fame as so-called punk doctor, as the chairman pointed out. But the point was, I was tremendously in love. Not with Aristotle, punk rock, or abstractions, but with a human being that then and since then has been the constantly challenging miracle creature of my life, Pipsa, a redhead from Lapland. I could not get her out of my mind, even as I was trying to focus on Aristotle. Why am I talking about Aristotle when my passion is to talk, indeed sing, about Pipsa? In the inspiration of the moment, I came up with the idea that maybe I could talk about Aristotle and Pipsa at the same time. Why not bring Pipsa in, say, as a melodic accomplice, additional theme, playing that tone of love along with the magnificent backbeat of Aristotle's actuality-potentiality distinction. This is what I did. And still to this day, it seems to me worth keeping in mind that in music, if you've got an A part to your song and a B part separately, the challenge is to find the bridge to connect the two. Most people in any audience don't have close contact with Aristotle. Most people do have a close connection to somebody they love. All have a connection to their own lives. Why not work from the latter towards the former, forming a bridge? Since that particular lecture here in Portania 40 years ago, I've given hundreds and hundreds of lectures in universities and even more outside the academia in organizations, companies, and for the general public. I venture to say many Finns, when hearing the word philosophy, the word in Finnish for a philosopher, tend to think of my person, of Pipsa and perhaps their own love, more often than, say, Aristotle and Kant's categories. I'm not comparing Pipsa to Aristotle here, but the fact is, for most people, it probably feels more significant to think about one's loved ones than to battle intellectually with Aristotle. As reference points for one's thinking, from the point of view of living a life, one's loved ones offer more that is relevant to think what and how you think about them than do the figures of Western philosophy. The prospects of something subjectively valuable showing up for your life as a result of the movement of the thinking of your thinking in the felt present moment of, say, a lecture is more forthcoming if you bridge your reflection on something you have experience with. In the case of using the already existing rich and unique thickness of your experience, approached as a resource of the thinking of your thinking, launched personally, that we here talk about. One argument for not taking the step of connecting the thinking of your thinking to your loved ones or anything else of relevance from the point of view of your life's experience could be forthcoming from the role-imposed frame conditions of your context. You might be delivering a lecture on history of philosophy as a junior philosopher, and your loved one has no officially granted status in the teaching curriculum. Yet, when Plato was relating to us about Charmides, nor did Charmides have an accredited status in the academia. Plato seems to have chosen Charmides as well as the other individual personalities that he mentions by name because he thought his readers could relate to them. Surely it is possible to envision someone might choose such a strategy of working through a relatable realm of people's everyday experience in order to find an engaged and thought-provoking bridge to themes such as reflective moderation, public use of reason, wisdom and empathy. If someone considered it pivotal to generate potentially transformative yield for the actual living of people's life beyond intellectual abstraction. It is possible for a human being to reflect a theme in a way that makes a difference to his or her life. Some, indeed many people, have perceived Plato as a writer, putting his literary genius and expressive force to touch the reader, to having targeted precisely that possibility. Plato's teacher Socrates had most certainly engaged in the activity through the oral form. It seems to me astonishing that this fundamental aspect of philosophy, through the written word as in Plato or through the oral discourse as in Socrates, philosophy and thinking as a transformative force needs defense and articulation in our time. If philosophy is to be a transformative force, one element is transformation within individuals. Effects of ideas can be witnessed on the level of whole nations, culture or history, serving also some of the worst aspects of the human endowment. But ultimately, each individual in this auditorium right now lives his or her own life in ways that could be better tomorrow. Someone might envision something anew as a result of a heartfelt conversation with someone from Brazil. Anne, Pipsa's sister, had seen in the tram some Brazilian participants that were very excited. Beautiful, beautiful. So that's why I thought about this. Someone might envision something anew as a result of a heartfelt conversation with someone from Brazil, whom you didn't know yesterday. But in the spontaneous conversation that emerges non-adversarially, you could sense the warmth, the goodness of intention, sincerity, a desire to grow and help others, to move forward, a touch of what Lincoln called the better angels of our nature. Any one of those Athenians that cast their vote to convicting Socrates could have done what the next fellow did who voted for Socrates. Each of those people that stormed the Capitol Hill on January 6, 2021 could have stayed home reading Bible, eat a hamburger, or talk to a stranger with empathy and interest. It is possible for a human being to envision an uplifting dialogue that touches you and raises you above the ordinary and above what your favorite dopamine-injecting fear and anger feed leads you to think, about a life better examined. It is possible for us to think our thoughts from the point of view of others and the whole that we serve in order to make life better. That is the point of philosophy as a transformative force. Thank you very much.
Testing. Okay. We have a few minutes time for ask some questions from Professor Saarinen if everyone is interested. But remember, we are actually streaming out live at the moment, so others can be joining us and watching what we're talking about here. But please be free to ask the floor if you want to ask a question for Professor Saarinen.
You were talking about using something we lived to explain, to come to philosophical thoughts. I was wondering if you could also link that with literature, using literature, example out of literature to come out of literature to philosophy. Like, for example, children, maybe fiction, like science fiction, to improve our world, using fiction to go from a abstract, fictive reality to a better reality in our realm.
Thank you. Excellent question. Let me make two kind of observations. One observation is that one of the aspects of the French philosophical scene that I always admired was the fact that many of the key philosophers, by any standard, wrote beautifully. In fact, so much so that they were prized with the Nobel Prize, like Sartre did and Bergson did. Now, to me, this always suggested the point that maybe the boundary is not that sharp between the two. And of course, one can say that given the fact that even abstract philosophy really doesn't have a prefixed, pre-given subject matter, there's always a case of kind of play of language that is involved. So as a result, you could say the institution of literature and the institution of philosophy writing from that perspective is understandable if it's not that sharp, the distinction. And in my case, I most certainly think that if we take serious kind of Socratic call for philosophy, where the idea is that you think about your thinking from the point of view of wanting to generate better life as a result of better such thinking, it's clear that some of the sources we have in literature, which on the face of it is not considered that philosophical, I think is something we should go into with full force. Just like I think, and I try to suggest, we should take our experience generally more seriously as the source with which to bridge the more conceptual considerations.
So, any other questions? Does someone else, please?
So what do you think is the specific reason that philosophy is the way it currently is, being mainly isolated and how it is an ivory tower that's inaccessible to the public? But besides just that, if there were to be a paradigm shift within philosophy, do you think it would take a long time to achieve what Ponti posits as like the state of what philosophy should be?
Thank you. Again, excellent question. I think one definitely important element that we often don't, as philosophers, address is the fact that most academic philosophers get their salary from the university institution. But the university institution in most countries is not devoted to the kind of free thinking that, in fact, Collège de France aims to be, but comes, in a sense, in a very, very structured way that maybe serves the structured way the university is set up. Let's say progress in physics or in biology. But I don't think it serves progress in philosophy the way the original promise of philosophy was. So one answer to the question, in my view, is that the university system as the home for conducting philosophy and for individual philosophers to fund their living is, I think, a problem. In my own case, I left University of Helsinki, where I had taught up until then, in 1999. And this was because of the fact that I had started to give organizational lectures, company lectures, for which I was paid for one lecture as much as my whole month's salary at the university. So it was very lucrative. So as a result, I didn't need the income I got from the university. But I found that this was very very positive in the sense that I could think more freely, with the result that then this was before Aalto University. There was a university called Helsinki University of Technology, an engineering school. So the engineering school suggested that I would join their faculty. But I was so suspicious of the academic context that I first asked to be 70% on leave. But it turned out to be great because there wasn't a philosophy chair. So it was just me. And I remember my first discussion with who was sort of my boss at the time there, regarding what I would teach. And he said, well, you would teach whatever you want to teach the way you want to teach it. Because we are already pretty good when it comes to many of those subjects that this institution, Helsinki University of Technology, is devoted to. But you bring in the kind of thinking of one's thinking that applies to life itself. So in whatever way you do it, clearly seems to work in organizational context, which I had been doing by that time already for more than 10 years. So that's how the kind of lecturing that then has got, I would say, quite a lot of fire in this country, because so many people, first of all, started to come to the lectures, but then as we put the lectures to YouTube, the people started to watch them from YouTube and later on to listen to them through Spotify, found something in the lectures, but the lectures were not of this or that. They were, as it were, a platform for thinking for people themselves. And this is what people, and we are now here talking about tens of thousands of people, that the YouTubes have been watched more than 2 million times. These are university lectures in Finnish. The entire country is 5.6 million. So it really is huge, in some sense, impact. But it's not an impact in the sense that someone would go to a given lecture of mine in order to learn something of Aristotle or learn something of systems thinking, although those would be themes that I hope somebody would go into more deeply. But the main point is that the person gets a chance to work with his or her own thinking. And this is a possibility that the university as an institution doesn't really serve or facilitate or hold in value.
We have time for one more short question, if there is someone who's interested. You had your hand up first.
Okay, Professor, first of all, thank you for a very inspiring lecture and answers. Actually, I was inspired by your answer that you gave to this last question. So I would like to return to this third quotation. In order to understand the total function of the philosopher, we must remember Socrates. So can we be even more radical when it comes to the things that you were talking about previously? Can we say that philosophy should be some experimental existence or existential experiment. Maybe while we are teaching philosophy, or as long as we are teaching philosophy or studying philosophy and just doing that, we are the part of the decadence. Maybe true philosophers should live philosophy and try to change the way the existence is, composed, through the way of living, not through the way of thinking and just thinking. And maybe, as Brecht did in theater, maybe we should penetrate into masses in a different kind of way. Maybe we should go to, and teach population that is not, that can not have the approach to philosophy in some formal way and stuff like that. So what do you think about that?
Well, thank you for this. I think this is a great point you just made. Let me make just one addition. I just briefly mentioned a theme that originally to me was a little bit perplexing in Plato. When Plato is emphasizing Socrates as a midwife, so to me this was somehow strange. I remember in high school. It took me quite some time to realize that, of course, it's possible for somebody to envision himself or herself, let's say as a teacher, to be somebody who, in fact, isn't really so much teaching a subject or a discipline, but somehow helps to give birth through the person who, in fact, is bringing about the baby, but is his or her baby. So that way of thinking to me which of course means then that if you want to be such a teacher or such a philosopher, you can't hide behind your sort of expertise of the given thematics that you're supposed to deliver to your students, because that's not your primary idea then, as a Socratic midwife. Means you can't hide behind it. You somehow have to take a stance yourself. You as in some sense, represent the whole thing yourself. So if you don't think, if you don't take the thinking of your thinking, if you don't take the examination of your life yourself personally seriously, I think people can sense that. And me being a Finn, one of the, I think, cultural strengths of our country is that Finland in many ways is a country of no bullshit. But the country of no bullshit also means that you don't have the kind of ornaments behind which you can hide. You know, Donald Trump would never be possible in Finland. But for Americans, he does have charm. He does mesmerize. I'm just describing, I think, a fact. It means, I think, in my case, me being Finn, that there is kind of instinctive sense to some kind of authenticity as a human being that I think is part of our cultural heritage. I mean, we can't really speak English even that well. You know, we can't even pronounce the keyword change properly, many of us. You know, remember, when you pronounce the keyword change, you need to push your lips outwards at the end. Change, as opposed to change. But the proper Finn, you know, a proper Finnish engineer man, for instance, doesn't necessarily push his lips outwards even when kissing. Much less when speaking a language. You know, but the good point there is really this: it's some kind of almost innocence. Well, many of you stay in Arthur Hotel. It's a good hotel, but you can, the Finnish personnel might not be your most polite in the world. I don't know if it is or it isn't, but typically it's not that sort of overtly polite, but it's warm in some kind of deeper way. And when you have a Finn by your side, then you really have something.
Thank you, Professor Saarinen.